What's up, everybody? It's my favorite subject again, the one that I've obsessed 24/7 about for over 10 years now. And it doesn't matter what subject we're talking about, I'm going to make sure everybody knows how I feel about this. And if somebody puts out a video and doesn't acknowledge this as a fact, then I call them a shill. Because, like this commenter says, I've never seen any evidence of a whirling, twirling, hurling, hurtling, wibbling, wobbling, zipping, zooming, rushing, rolling, twisting, spinning, and spiraling space ball, spherical planet Earth, and neither has anybody else. Okay, Dr. Sluice, I see you got this all figured out. So let's just have a little look at what you're telling me here. This is how the world really is. I'm sure you've looked at this many times and you know exactly how this works. The sun only lights a certain area of the Earth at a time, and then it goes so far away that it just goes out of view. And in the summertime, the orbit is up higher and closer to the center, and the wintertime, it's closer to the outside edge and lower. Okay, now let's look at this. There are thousands of videos on here of amateur photographers with a P900 or P1000 filming the moon. You don't need $1,000 camera to see this for yourself either. You can just use a cheap pair of binoculars and you'll see the exact same thing as this camera shows. So this isn't coming from NASA. This is something anyone can see for themselves. They start off right here, and what's the first thing you notice? Just right off the top of your head. Okay, let's get back to that. Now you zoom in on the moon, and what's the first thing you notice? Well, the first thing I notice is all of these craters and all of these mountain ranges. Now let's look up towards the top of it. Right here, these look like some pretty big rocks, casting some big shadows right there. And the next thing I notice is the shadows in the craters. On the edge right here, you can see a pretty good shadow, so that's either a higher ridge there or a deeper indention. Looking up here, you can see there's not much shadow at all, so that's not rising up very high around the edges of that. But you can see that this is a solid object. It's not swamp gas. I've heard people say that this is plasma, but we've seen the exact same markings on the moon since the rediscovery of the telescope. Plasma moves all over the place like a plasma ball, or when you get a big CME from the sun and it hits our atmosphere with all of those high energy particles, then you get aurora borealis, which moves all over the place. So plasma doesn't just sit there unmoving for millennia. And once again, you see shadows. That means that it's not creating its own light, it's reflecting the sunlight. When was the last time you flipped on a light bulb and had a crescent light bulb? The moon doesn't put off its own light, and then when you get closer to the edge, you see that all of the shadows are extended more. That's because it's on the outside of a ball. And then you hardly have any shadows on the part of the ball that is facing the sun. Yes, ball. Get a cheap pair of binoculars, go out and look at the moon, and tell me it's not spherical. It 100% is. But I know some people are absolutely fanatical in their new religion and will deny that too. How do you stick to a ball? See, you can't stick to a ball. Down is down. There's no such thing as gravity. Down is down. Okay, I'll give you one more chance to think about it. What do you see here? Here's a clue. Yeah, that's right. The moon is just floating in the sky. So let me take your model. Here's the sun. Here's the moon. That's the disk of the Earth down below, and they're floating around overhead. And then, oh, wait a minute. Down is down, so everything falls down. So how does the sun and moon just float around up in the sky? You expect me to believe that there's some twirling, hurling, hurtling, wibbling, wobbling, zipping, zooming, rushing, rolling, twisting, turning, spinning, and spiraling space ball? Well then, in your model here, how is the sun and the moon just floating in the sky? Magic? And no one has ever seen a spherical planet. Look, you can show this to any 5-year-old and ask them what it is, and they're going to say it's a ball. And if down is just down, then this is what happens with the sun and the moon. So, sorry, Dr. Seuss, but you've obviously just looked at the parts that you want to believe and ignored the blaring obvious here. And if you're not comprehending this part of things, I don't think you're going to get the more complex part of things. Like this. Let's say this is the path of the sun in the wintertime when the sun is lower. And then this is the path of the sun in the summer when it's higher overhead. Now, a day is 24 hours long all year round. Every single day, 24 hours. So if the sun travels this circuit in 24 hours, Then in the wintertime, it travels a circuit twice that size in the same 24 hours. Then that means the sun has doubled its speed, gradually and perfectly as the circuit got bigger and bigger. And then it turns around and starts heading higher and slowing down gradually and perfectly so that every single day is 24 hours. And then the whole thing repeats. So the sun is constantly going lower in the sky and speeding up, and then slowing down and climbing higher in the sky. Now, just a reminder of Newton's first law of motion that I know you know by heart and have taken into consideration here. But a body at rest remains at rest, or if in motion, remains in motion at a constant velocity unless acted on by a net external force. So why don't you tell me what net external force is causing the sun to speed up and slow down? Well, you can tell me that after you tell me how this wimbly-pimbly ball is floating around in space. And the sun is a ball too. Once again, you can verify this through amateur videographers. And the first thing you notice is that, yes, the sun floats in the sky. And then when you zoom in, you see all of these sunspot regions. And when you track these day after day, you notice that they are constantly traveling from east to west from our perspective. And when you watch the blast coming from these sunspots, you can see which direction they're spewing off of this ball. You can tell this one is about 3/4 to our left, which is behind us. When it's 3/4 to the right, then that's exactly where we're going to be when it hits us. And then you see a lot of this. So there are a lot of ways of checking to see if any of this is true. And when it all lines up, then it all lines up. What doesn't line up is the sun and the moon magically floating up overhead, and all the stars for that matter. I'm not even going to get into the planet, moon, and stars traveling at a 23-degree tilt that on this model would mean they went underneath the Earth, but the other side of the planet can see them. But I will address the sun just going so far away that you don't even see it anymore. A basic law of perspective is that if an object is traveling further away from you, then it's getting smaller the whole time. Go out and watch a car driving off down the road. It gets smaller and smaller and smaller. I've already shown this about 10 times, but I can see 100 times will never be enough. But this is what it would look like if the sun were just getting further and further away from where you are. It gets smaller and smaller. This is not conjecture. This is objective fact. Now, what I'm doing is just taking my cell phone with a picture of the sun on it and walking away from the camera. And it looks nothing like what we see on a sunset, like you see on the right. What you do observe, though, is this. And here I'm taking my cell phone and just staying the same distance from the camera and going straight down. That is exactly what you observe during a sunset. The sun doesn't get any smaller, it just goes down. So that is the sun going down, and this is the sun getting further and further away. If you ever see this in the nighttime sky, just kiss your loved ones goodbye because it's all over. This all came about because I dared to mention the multitude of impact craters found around the world. All of those stars are where I've tracked these impact structures that look like this. And I was even watching a video the other day talking about the impact crater at the Cumberland Gap that enabled the westward expansion of Europeans a couple hundred years ago. It turns out it was an impact crater that helped the settlers get through the Appalachian Mountains. Here you can see it's just ridge after ridge after ridge where all of the ground has been crumpled up. Those are all mountain ridges, and the best way to get through there was where this impact crater was. So that's the world famous Cumberland Gap. These impact craters have played a huge role in the history of mankind. You can look at the moon and see that at one time we were traveling through a debris field. But that's all impossible because rocks can't float in space. Well, you can go outside on 27 out of 28 nights and you'll see this rock floating in space. And it makes way more sense that they're just floating for no reason over a perfectly flat disk. Static out.